Welcome, guys, to Why Do Men, the podcast exploring male behaviour in dating and relationships. This week, we're getting onto something quite serious. It's about rejection. And to help me unpack this, I've got an amazing guest in Anna Mathur, who's a psychologist specialising in emotional intelligence relationships. I'll let Anna introduce herself, but welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much. It's great. It's great to be here. I was saying I'm often surrounded by women when I do podcasts, so this is a real treat and so necessary. So I'm a therapist. I am really passionate about taking therapy outside of the therapy room. And from all my training, that was never a thing that we did. It was very much kind of 2 sofas, box of tissues, like exactly how you see it in the movies. And then I started sharing bits on social media. And one day I read, I think it was in the newspaper, this word psychoeducation. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is what I do. I love just sharing all that knowledge, kind of woven with my own experience as well, and just kind of putting it out into the world so that people can kind of have a little bit more insight, a little bit more understanding.
Yeah.
So yeah, do that through books, podcasts, anything.
Amazing. And I think there's a real need for that at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's almost democratizing the idea of therapy, because there can be a lot of barriers to therapy, one being cost, obviously. So I think the more you can do to share and help people, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to talk to you. Today's episode is all about rejection, which is very, very broad. And I mean, you're the expert, but I suppose comes from a bunch of different criteria, backgrounds, factors, all that kind of stuff. But I wondered if we could just start by sort of exploring rejection in a very broad way. And like, can you articulate what rejection is? And
yeah, I mean, it's that feeling of being excluded and like abandoned, really. And I don't know about you, but even when you say the word rejection, I have like feelings.
I feel rejected.
I feel like, my mind is cast back to that feeling of just feeling rejected.
Yeah.
And feeling kind of excluded or feeling unwanted. And actually, like, the reason that we feel it is that the brain processes rejection like physical pain. So it is that kind of that sense of kind of, that's why it's so intense. And no wonder, because it's uncomfortable, we'll try and do anything we can not to feel rejected. And, if we think back to cavemen, to be rejected at that point means that actually you're unsafe. Like, no one's looking out for you. No one's hunting for you. No one's kind of stoking the fire. If you were kind of cast out or unwanted, it was a matter of life or death.
Right.
So we've got that inside of us. So no wonder we're wired to avoid that feeling.
And presumably that's because, as human beings, we're meant to exist in small communities, right? Where you have people that have your back, that look after your kids with you, that help you provide and nourish that community. Do you think that rejection is becoming harder as the world feels like it's becoming a bit more polarized and people are spending more time by themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as a culture and as a generation, we've never been connected to so many people.
Yeah.
Right. We're still connected to people that without social media, without Facebook, without all of those things, actually we would have naturally lost contact with them. But we're still kind of connected. And I think we're so over connected. But also at the same time, people have never professed a feeling so lonely. So that kind of shows something, is like the depth of the relationships that we have. And those, like, how many people do we really, truly feel seen and accepted by, worst bits and all.
And everything I read about this topic is that people are becoming more accustomed to spending time by themselves, particularly young people, right? So young men, and obviously this is a podcast about male behaviour. It's almost like, I don't think that a lot of men see the benefit in connection anymore. It's becoming more and more normalised to spend time by yourself. And I don't think that's how human beings are meant to live.
And it's so easy to do that, isn't it? And I think we feel in touch with people. We can send a load of WhatsApp messages, and we think, right, we know how that person is. We know what they've had for breakfast. We know what workout they're doing. But ultimately, like, do we really?
Yeah.
Whereas actually, in the times before all of those kind of quick, easy forms of communication, we'd have to meet up. We'd see someone physically and we'd sense how they were. We'd see it through their body language and the more nuanced kind of ways of communicating. And I think, we feel like we're ticking the box of having the conversations when actually, clearly, we're yearning so much. We're yearning for more, and it's not really hitting the spot.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so rejection. the first thing that I really want to cover, this is a podcast about male behaviour, and I wanted to really pick apart whether men feel or experience rejection or fear rejection in a different way to women.
That's such a good question. I think, for men, it's not necessarily more kind of painful, as we've said, because of the way that our brains process it. It is painful, but it's not necessarily more painful for men. It's just processed in a different way and understood in a different way. And if we think about kind of the archetypal woman, like they tend to have so many more relationships to process these feelings. Just there's a lot more chatter, there's a lot more kind of connection, a lot more meeting up. So probably less likely to kind of suppress some of those feelings and more likely to kind of externally process through talking. Whereas, men, again, this is like completely archetypally, what we see is that they tend to internalize some of that pain and just not talk about it, maybe mask it, maybe kind of brush it off with a bit of a joke. And it's because it's painful. They don't want to go there and they don't necessarily know how. So there might be a bit of avoidance there in talking about like, actually what does that feel like, and maybe just a bit of detachment from friends. We find that for men, when they're finding things hard, there is that temptation just to kind of retreat, just cut off a little bit and then kind of reemerge when things just feel a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So, it's more to do with how it's processed, I think.
And I mean, for me, this is about, you mentioned vulnerability, right? I think for men, like my own personal experience would be, if I'm dating someone and they decide that they want to end the relationship, it really hurts, and it hurts men and women when someone breaks up with you. But for men, I think it's a sign of weakness, or it's viewed as a sign of weakness, whereby I'm like, I wouldn't always be open with my friends about that. I'd probably make something up and say like, it just didn't work out, and smooth over it. I think women are a lot more willing to communicate with their friends that the real, authentic, genuine reasons why that relationship didn't work out, because men want to protect themselves. I suppose there's also another element of men, just that you mentioned archetypes, like that archetype of masculinity being like, right, I'm strong and I'm going to go and hunt down a partner, and I'm then going to like, an element of possessiveness around that too. Do you think that plays a part?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think sometimes that pain is actually just pointing to that vulnerable part of you that yearns for something, that needs something, that actually you need connection and you yearn for connection. And that feeling of recognizing that you do, not necessarily being needy, as we see it, like just kind of being exhaustingly needy, but it's actually just recognizing that you have needs that not necessarily you alone can meet. And I think in our culture, men are kind of praised when they are kind of self-sufficient and, ticking lots of boxes in their outward sense. So actually recognizing that, I have a yearning for connection and intimacy. And to be seen and to be supported and to have company. That's expressing a very normal human need that I think has become a little bit like, oh no, I don't need someone. And it's not that sense of I need someone to complete me. It's actually that we're wired for connection as humans. So that's not a weakness. It's actually we are wired to seek companionship. So that's kind of reframe that. It's not a weakness. That's actually just a really normal human desire.
That's interesting.
So it's not failing.
And I think, again, there's a real difference between men and women with that, because for women, I don't think that they would have any sort of shame in acknowledging that. Whereas, I mean, I see it all the time, right? Like there are organisations, there's an organisation called Board of Dating Apps that host dating events all around London. And they are amazing, and their female tickets sell out within 24 hours of going on sale, and they cannot find men. And I think that there's an element of men not wanting to put themselves out there and being like, right, I have these needs. I really want to find a partner. I really want to connect with someone and build a life with someone, because it's not seen as cool. It's seen as a bit of a weakness. And personally, I think it's a bit silly, but I think this is a truth which we need to acknowledge, is that maybe it's not really seen as a very cool thing for men to express that desire.
And it's that, we are wired for community, and we cannot meet all of those needs for connection on our own. We can't. And it's hard to kind of find ways to push through that. But I think it's just becoming okay with the fact that that is a very normal human requirement.
I wanted to dig around into the actual physical feeling of rejection. You mentioned physical pain.
Yeah.
Everyone has experienced rejection in some guises, and there's two parts to this question. So the first one is around delving into that feeling a little bit more. The second thing that I wanted to ask you about, which we can come into in a minute, is how rejection in your earlier life actually shapes that. And so maybe let's tackle that one first, which is about, early childhood experiences shaping your ability to deal with rejection as an adult.
Yeah. You know what? I think the problem comes when we see rejection, experience rejection. So it is a threat. Rejection is a threat. That's how we experience it, even if, in the grand scheme of things, someone feeling like you're not the right partner for them, ultimately that is a rejection of a part of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge comes in rejection when we feel like the entirety of who we are is not enough. And if underneath it all, you are already feeling that to some degree, or you're fearful that you're never going to be enough, or your self-worth is actually quite challenged and you feel like, actually, I need to kind of prove something of myself, then it's really painful because you're essentially having something that you already feel about yourself kind of proven. If I buy... I don't know why tents just come into my head, right? If I buy a tent from
Sure.
wherever you buy a tent from, and I get it home and one of the poles is broken.
Yeah.
Right. And I go back to the shop and I'm like, one of the poles is broken. So they get another pole for me. And they're like, here we go, here's a fixed one. I'm not rejecting the tent as an entirety. There is just a part of it that isn't suiting my need.
Yes.
Right. And I think what happens is that we feel when rejection really hurts is that we feel like the entirety of who we are is rejected.
Yeah.
Not just the fact that actually we don't really like any of the same things, or that actually we just don't click.
Yeah.
That actually it's just that one part of me that isn't suiting.
Yeah.
Right. I think what we do is we take that kind of feedback and we apply it to the entirety of who we are. So it becomes, instead of we're not compatible, it becomes I'm not enough. Who I am is not enough for this person. That, if I might say to you, I don't like your shirt. I happen to like your shirt. Right?
Thank you.
To take that then and think, well, she thinks I'm rubbish. She thinks, she hates me.
Yeah.
And it's actually, often what happens in rejection is that there's just a part. It's not the whole of you.
Right.
But that's where it hurts, is that I think we feel like the entirety of who we are is just not enough.
And I suppose that ties into the validation of who you are and your worth does not come from other people. It should come from yourself, right? But I mean, we've spoken about avoidance and all of the triggers around that so much in this podcast and in the past, because it crops up time and time again for men, right? Like those sort of avoidant tendencies. And I guess for a guy, I would describe myself as avoidant. The feeling of being rejected is not even something which I would ever put myself in a situation where I'd feel rejected. And normally the behaviour that manifests, or the impact of that avoidance, is that I will reject people before they have a chance to reject me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it becomes challenging to even get that far in a relationship. Whereas I feel if you can get to a place where you believe that in and of myself, I am okay. In and of myself, I believe that I'm valid and I have worth. If you really can get to a place that you believe that, if someone says, we're not right for each other, I'm not feeling it, you can stand on that foundation of that belief that, okay, well, that's just not worked. I am okay. We've always got stuff to work on. We've all got toxic traits. We could all do with kind of learning more about ourselves and getting more insights. But, I think if at the end of the day you struggle with that sense of confidence and that sense of worth, then of course it's going to hurt even more when someone says something that just kind of impounds that. If you can't just kind of hold on to that truth of, I know that I'm doing the best that I can.
Yeah.
And for someone that will be enough, but for this person it's not.
Okay. The top of the question was about some of the kind of key instigators or the reasons why some people suffer or fear rejection more than others. And I know that's a very broad question, but are there any trends that you see in your practice in terms of in their childhoods that struggled with certain things which then led to them fearing rejection?
Absolutely. So I think in an ideal world, we'd grow up, and this is rare, And we'd feel like no matter who I am, what I do, I'm loved and accepted,
Yeah.
Unconditionally. And what happens is that a child who feels no matter what tantrums they throw, no matter, how many times they refuse their dinner, no matter what grades they get in school, they can come home and there is a space that they feel acceptable. I'm loved, I'm accepted. And what we do is we internalize that. And this is what we learn to believe about ourselves, right? Those external narratives, the things that we hear and the way people respond, that becomes that inner dialogue that we have. That becomes our understanding of what makes us acceptable. What often happens is that certain behaviours are praised. Right, you're a good boy. You're an easy boy. Look at your brother who's going off the wall. You're the easy one.
Mm-hmm.
So then you internalize the fact that actually what makes me acceptable is to be liked. Actually I've got to be easy. I've got to be not needy. I've got to, kind of meet my own needs, or it might be kind of grades. It might be the external things that you have, when you should have this job and then you'll always be you'll always be comfortably off, and kind of that nudging down a certain path. And, that narrative then is that actually this is what I need to do in order to be acceptable to the world.
Right.
And that's what's internalized, so these kind of like psychological roots of this is how we learn that we are valid and valued.
Yeah.
And the great thing is that we can, when we start recognizing those things, that we can challenge them. And then you've got kind of normal societal expectations, that pressure to lead and to succeed and perform. Right. And those things are really, really validated by our culture, aren't they? And
yeah.
We really notice when we feel short, like we've fallen short. And this starts at school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Graded and
yeah.
You're praised for attendance, and so you just kind of internalize this narrative that these are the things that are important, and if I can't always do that, then I'm not, I'm not succeeding and I'm failing somehow.
What about abandonment, like broken families, and presumably that comes into it a lot?
Yeah, and you get this kind of like this sense underneath, and like this is so many clients that I speak to, it's that feeling that people will leave me.
Yeah.
That actually, if I am vulnerable and if I express a need, that person, in those core relationships weren't able to meet that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. It might be, broken relationships. It might be kind of mental health. It could be many things. But again, it's that internalized sense of people can't give me what I need. So therefore, it's easier for me to meet those needs. People will leave me. Like if I invest in those relationships, they will go. So, again, to start challenging those narratives takes actually risking vulnerability and sharing a bit more of yourself. And if you are rejected, doing that kind of internal work of knowing that it's not about who you are. Yeah. It's the circumstances that people let us down.
Yeah. So thinking about that, and there's two different elements to it for me. There's like either you can be someone who's so fearful of rejection because that's going to bring up some of those childhood triggers that you're doing so much the utmost to avoid, or there is the other side of the coin, which is people that are willing to go into relationships and be vulnerable, but then find rejection very difficult to process. And I suppose they're two very different types of people, right? Does that sort of link to attachment a little bit?
Yeah, oh gosh, absolutely. And that's again kind of like internalizing these, learning this message that at the end of the day, I'm okay.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, me in and of myself have kind of worth and value, and just not letting other people and circumstances dictate. Like that's an immovable thing, right? Your value is immovable. No matter what you do, at the end of the day, I could go and speak to someone on death row. And I promise you, if I was to really unpick their story and take away all the layers of behaviour, at the bottom, you would find compassion for that person. And I think it's knowing that so much of our fear is about what people have said, how people have treated us, and not everybody will.
Yeah. I wanted to speak a little bit about men specifically.
Yes.
And specifically the kind of maybe the societal expectation or, you talked about masculine archetypes before. Like, I think there are reasons why men fear rejection in modern society. Yeah. And I feel like, I hear this all the time when I run Q&As on Instagram that men aren't willing to approach women anymore, right? That's the statement that I hear more than anything else. And do you think that comes from a fear of rejection?
I think it comes from a fear of rejection, but I also think it's like this throwaway approach to dating.
Yeah.
You know, the swiping right, the swipe. It's actually just, it's turning people into commodities. It's turning people into something on a shelf that you just walk past. Oh, I don't like. You know, I've sat there when friends have done it. Oh, I don't like his hair. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's such a small part. You're rejecting an entire person. But
he's 5'11" and I want 6 foot.
Exactly. And it's this sense that actually when you just look at one part of a person, you miss the entirety of who you are. You know, we're kind of turning each other into like items on a shelf. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that I started dating before all of this happened because, you know, it's also the icks. Yeah. You know, the phenomenon of the ick is that you can do one thing. Yeah. And you know that girl may go and chat to a friend and be like, oh, this is one that I heard, right? Yeah. He put the milk in before the tea. Yeah. You know, it was gone. And you're just like, wow, if things are hanging on, if I'm walking such a tight line where if I put the milk in before the tea, I'm a goner.
That is
and
a bit
she's off chatting to
fair, but let's,
you know, do you know what? I'm grateful that my relationship started before the icks because you know, there were probably many, you know, but there wasn't this sense of like everyone just being kind of disposable. Yeah. So I think, you know, if you already fear rejection and there's already a cost for that is that you've got to hold this pain because your mates don't talk about it, then, you know, to feel like you're just treading this really fine line of you could do one thing that you may normally do always in your life and no one's ever commented on it, but this woman's going to go and chat to all of her friends about it because you did this one thing. Yeah. And then you've got to go through this process of feeling rejection, internalizing and not being able to talk to anyone about it. No wonder it feels like the stakes are really high. Right. Aren't they?
And this is one of the things, I guess, about online culture is that you're right, it should have opened up more connections and opportunities to connect with people. That's one of the pros. But one of my best girl mates sent me a list of 120 icks a few weeks ago. And it was like this crowdsourced list which had been going around in girls' WhatsApp groups. And some of them, I mean, they were hilarious, but you're also like, right, people have written those for a reason. So I icked myself out on the tube over here because I was standing on the tube and not holding onto the rail, and then the tube slowed down and I stumbled. And apparently that's an ick.
Oh no. I probably would have icked about 1 million people's day just being myself.
But this is the thing, I'm going through that list and I'm like, 25 of those things are things that I do regularly. So and I suppose that's one of the challenges of online culture is that I feel like it's made rejection easier because you can reject for very, very minute reasons.
Yeah, and without having conversations. Yeah. So you can just just disconnect from someone. They don't even have to know why. And then it leaves people, you know, wondering. And I think for men, again, if you are not feeling like you have a group of mates that you can process, and this is why I love this podcast and what you're doing is you're opening up these conversations. If you don't feel like you have somewhere to turn and to process what just happened, you know, this primitive part of you that is feeling like I'm unwanted and I've just been excluded. Yeah. You know, you're then just having to sit with that. And what happens in those moments is that we revert to that little child. You know, you revert to that little boy that maybe was, you know, the last one to be picked at school. Because this is what happens is we feel very young in these moments. And what we need is to be able to and this is what women are much better at. Yeah. And it's much more available to them to externalize how this feels so that you then have your friends saying, oh, but this, just making sense of it for you.
Yeah. I find that's a really interesting point. And one of the things which I think I do an okay job of when it comes to my female friends is they'll be like, this guy's acting a certain way, or he's not spoken to me in a few days. Like, what does this behaviour mean? And more often than not, they're not willing to come to terms with the actual truth behind the behaviour, and they'll make up excuses as to why that guy might have rejected them. And I don't know, that's about self-protection, I guess, or trying to rationalise behaviour in a way which doesn't make you feel bad about yourself. But I see this a lot.
To add that insight to it.
I think
really helpful.
Girls need more guy best mates and guys need more girl best mates. Because girls can be much more empathic and compassionate about some of this behaviour, and maybe that would make men feel more willing to talk about it. And I think it works the other ways as well, where sometimes, you know, women for all their amazing qualities, sometimes you just need someone to give them the hard truth. Like, he's just a bit of a bellend. Like,
he's just probably not feeling it, and he doesn't know how to say it.
Right.
So he's just stepped off into the background, and
Exactly.
absolutely. And I think sometimes people just won't like us. And I actually wrote a book called The Uncomfortable Truth. And chapter 1 is some people don't like you. And sometimes that is absolutely nothing to do with you whatsoever. And I share this story how at uni there was this girl that she just wasn't nice to me.
Yeah.
And I just tried really hard to kind of win her over. And I remember once after a few too many, I think it was like VK cherries back then, she just turned around drunkenly and said, I don't like you. I've just worked out why. And I was like, okay, why?
Yeah.
She said, because you remind me of my cousin.
Right.
And I'm like, there's nothing I can do about that. And I think sometimes it's recognizing in the rejection, in the stepping away, that actually it may be nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It may be that you ick them on something that you're probably going to do again 10 times, and maybe wouldn't even bother someone else. And and I think when these conversations just cut off, and then if they're not kind of had with mates, then it just leaves that feeling of this is painful, got to swallow it down, and then it just kind of layers upon itself.
This is such a big topic. There's so much stuff that I want to ask you about this stuff, because this is rejection predominantly in a romantic context, right? But there's also rejection, to your point, in friendship groups and in family dynamics and all that kind of stuff. There's so much that you can unpick there.
Work and
exactly. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But the next part of the sort of segment that I just wanted to touch on, like, I often ask people for a point of view on their own situations where they've been rejected. So I wondered if I could ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah, go on.
From my
absolutely
from my Instagram community.
Okay.
So, the first one is a woman who said, my boyfriend takes everything personally and actively avoids conflict. Right? How can I help him handle rejection better when this is in the context of it's not really rejection, it's feedback, but he feels like it's rejection?
Again, I think it's that sense of actually if he can work on his self-esteem and know that it's feedback. Like it's not a rejection on the entirety of who you are. And I think the more shakier ground that we stand on when it comes to confidence, the more impactful these opinions are. And knowing that actually sometimes it's subjective, sometimes it's factual, sometimes we do a rubbish job of something, but it doesn't mean that he is rubbish. I think sometimes it's recognizing where things are subjective opinion.
Yeah.
And actually another person might have a completely different opinion. And it's not an attack on who you are.
Yeah.
So for him, I think it's just having those conversations together and just thinking, right, what was this feedback? And what is that part of him that actually just feels completely, like, entirely just unwanted?
Yeah.
Hurt by that.
I always think getting into a long-term healthy relationship is one of the scariest things you can do as a man or a woman, because you are opening up every single part of you to somebody else.
Yeah.
And you are never going to meet someone that likes every single part of you. That's impossible. That's like Disney movie stuff, right? So I'm like, opening yourself up to, it's not criticism, but to understand that you're not a perfect human being and that that's actually okay.
It's okay. In fact, it's the only way it will ever be.
Yeah.
No matter how many self-help books you read, how much therapy you have, you will never reach the goal of finished.
Yeah, exactly.
Complete.
Being like
ever.
The Dalai Lama, like the most enlightened person in the world, that's not ever going to be you.
No, and I'm sure he probably still had toxic traits.
Right, exactly.
I think sometimes it's this striving towards a goal of, right, I want to be the perfect partner, or I want to, and actually you just can't be. Because I've been married 15 years, right? I am still learning stuff about myself. We are still winding each other out. We are still finding things that, we feel attacked or defensive about.
Yeah.
So and this is what I think when people just, when the ick is enough to end that first foray into getting to know someone where you're just kind of finding your way through.
Yeah.
How are you ever going to be able to have some of these hard conversations?
Yeah.
And journey through life curveballs together.
Exactly.
And huge challenges. And I think it's this. We just want to be comfortable. We want things to be easy. Maybe there are life hacks for absolutely everything, productivity hacks for everything. But actually, when it comes to getting to know someone, if you want to do it, well, there are going to be hard conversations. There are going to be moments where someone says something that is true and you just want to go into the defensive mode and you just want to protect yourself and put a barrier up. Well, actually, it's about, that softening into, if we can just recognize that if someone rejects us or a part of us, that actually underneath it all, I know I'm okay. I know that maybe we can work this through and talk this through. And it's that vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's that vulnerability that means, I will hear that hard thing and I will know that ultimately I'm doing my best. So therefore, let's talk about it. Maybe there is something I need to change. We all have our blind spots.
And it's also, it's not a negative thing if someone has addressed something and you haven't seen yourself. Like, look at that as growth, right? I know it's so hard.
And it is hard. But again, if you're working on confidence, I'd say that is the one thing. If you want to...
Yeah.
If you want rejection to hurt less and you don't want to just shove those walls up, it's working on self-esteem. It's, the ego can be so fragile, but often it's it's veiled in confidence. So it looks like confidence and bravado when really actually it's just a fiercely protected part of yourself, because you're almost waiting for someone to say something so you can kind of think, right, okay, well, actually, let me tell you something about yourself. And it's just it's putting a wall up, and really what we need to be doing in these moments is what can feel so counterintuitive, but to bring the wall down and be like, okay, so that's what you see in me. That's quite hard to hear. That makes me I actually feel really rejected. Can we talk about that? That's not what I intend. What, and just kind of going deeper instead of putting the wall up and being like, right, I'm out of here.
Yeah. What about a scenario whereby you get rejected and you aren't able to get the context behind it? Because this happens all the time.
All the time.
Right? And
all the time with ghosting and people just disappearing off.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You can't get in touch with them. You might not even have their number. You might have just been communicating through the apps. And it's kind of, how do you move forward without any sense of closure?
Yes, exactly.
And again, talking this through with friends, so that you do have a say. It might not be to that person. You can ask those questions, even though they might not get answered. But it's just, again, externally processing this, knowing that you're not alone in it, because you certainly won't be the only one that's experienced that. Tons of people listening will have experienced that.
Yeah.
And making sure that you have your say, even if it's not to that person. And then what happens is we're heard and seen in that feeling it just softens, right? And I think this is the power of feeling stuff, which is so uncomfortable, that actually if we just feel it and we talk about it, it does just abate.
Yeah.
We don't have to defend ourselves against it so much. And we start growing in confidence that, right, I can be rejected, it can be really hurtful, I can talk about it, and then it softens.
Okay. Second question I had was around a point I made earlier. I feel like men don't ever approach women anymore. And is that linked to them fearing being rejected?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, it's a vulnerable thing, isn't it, to take that step towards someone?
Yeah.
Because you're saying, I'm here. Do you like me? Do you want to get to know me? And then, at that very stage, it can be a no.
Do you know what I think the irony about that situation is?
Go on.
What I say to my girl pals is that I think the 5% of men that are willing to approach anyone in any scenario and be like, hey, you're hot, let's get a drink, they're not the men that you want to be attracting.
No. Yeah.
Because I almost think a bit of that fear shows an understanding of yourself, maybe an understanding of that person's boundaries. So
it's so hard.
It's horrible.
It's so hard. And I think knowing that you're not failing in finding this hard.
Yeah.
This is a very difficult field to be dating in.
Yeah.
Very difficult, where you feel like you're walking a line where you can do one little thing and that's it, you're out.
Exactly.
So, even it feels like a vulnerable thing to be doing.
Yeah.
In itself.
But there's also a point around it. It's so public. It's not you and that person. And it's one of the things about dating app culture, that online space, is that it's you and another person. So you can converse with that other person. If you get icked out or someone says that they don't like the way that you look like you're eating your spaghetti bolognese in one of your pictures, it's like, right, well, I only have to deal with that person in terms of that rejection. Whereas in a public sphere, it's like, oh my God, other people might see that and that must be so difficult to process.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's important to do it all the same.
Well, this is it. Maybe it's something.
The pushing through.
Right.
It is the discomfort and knowing, in a culture where we are given a million ways not to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
don't, here's 10 ways to kind of literally rest, like power through everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can have anything and everything that you want.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel uncomfortable. You can numb a feeling. You can scroll a feeling away.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not actually learning that it's very normal to find something uncomfortable,
right?
And to push through that.
Yeah.
The first discomfort in a relationship, that first feeling of like, oh, I'm just kind of losing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel they're not the fireworks anymore.
Uh-huh.
That's part of relation. That is part of normalizing in a relationship.
Right.
That is part of doing life together. The mundane stuff kicks in. Who's buying the milk?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a bit boring. I want the excitement again. But life isn't always comfortable and it's not always exciting. This is about finding someone to do life alongside.
Yeah.
And that will involve feeling little rejections over and over again.
Exactly.
And discomfort.
Honestly, I can relate this so much. Like, for the guys that are listening, this was a feeling that I would normally get like 2 or 3 months into a relationship, when there was a chemical thing about it where like that lust or whatever, oxytocin, I think it's the hormone.
Yeah.
And you're like, right, that's now died down. Like, maybe the sex you're having with that person isn't as passionate or spontaneous. And we're like, right, this is the moment to move out of a relationship.
Yeah.
That's the bit where the magic happens.
That's it, where it's starting.
Yeah, this is
That's it, where it's starting. And that's often the point when we bail out, because I think what is sold to us is this constant like dopamine seeking. Everyone's just dopamine seeking. It's just so readily available. But what we're doing in this constant seeking of dopamine is actually missing out on the realness of connection and life and relationship. And there will be times, and I've encountered this so many times with my husband, where, we're having a conversation that is going, or I really don't want to talk about this or think about this. I find my hand searching for my phone on the sofa.
Really?
Just to distract myself. And you do that over and over and over again. What you end up losing connection, or you end up missing out on connection.
Yeah.
Or you end up damaging connection. And it's actually in those moments where you think, what, this is hard.
Yeah.
This is really uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about this. That if you check out of that, you're going to keep checking out of it, and you will never get beyond. It's in the sitting in the discomfort that we actually start really getting to know each other and being able to stand alongside each other.
Weird. There's such a correlation between phone usage and like avoiding that real connection. Like in the men's group that I run, like we set a weekly challenge, and our challenge this week was no phone an hour before bed, an hour when you wake up. And my immediate feeling, like on day one of this challenge, when I put my phone away at 9 o'clock 2 nights ago, was like, sit with myself for a little bit, connect with myself. And then I want to speak to my mum. I want to speak to my sister. Like, there was almost this craving for real connection because I didn't have that little like dopamine bomb in my pocket anymore. So it's so interesting.
It is, but it's meeting that need for connection in the way that eating Haribo or something like that meets a need for nourishment.
Yeah.
It's giving you something, but it's not really what you're needing.
Yeah.
So on the surface, it looks okay, but actually, that there's a deeper craving there that isn't being met.
Exactly. Okay. Final segment of the episode is about the stuff we can do to deal with some of this. Yeah. Some of these feelings. So, talk to me as if I'm a man that is scared of rejection. So I don't have the guts to approach somebody, whether that's through an app in real life, because I'm so worried about that feeling. How can I get over that?
I think, first of all, know that feeling is really primitive. Rejection will always feel painful. Always. And you will face big and little rejections for the rest of your life. And you will have done so far in some feedback from work, in the fact that a friend didn't turn up to your birthday party, whatever it is, all of these kinds of rejection. It hurts because it feels like you're unwanted. Yeah. So I think reframing rejection, just understanding why it hurts and knowing that it always will. Right? Thinking of it as redirection. It's not about not being good enough. It's about not being the right fit. Yeah. And that's often the subtext, isn't it? When people, even if they word it terribly, or they do kind of make it about you because they feel frustrated and they want to kind of attack and get to the bit that hurts. It's not about me not being good enough. Think about the friendships and the relationships in your life where you're loved and accepted despite everything that you've been through. Yeah. So that is fundamental proof that you are enough, you are acceptable, you are wanted, you are valued. So kind of going back to some of that and thinking, right, this rejection, it doesn't mean that I am not good enough. It just means that I am not the right fit for this person. And the next thing is kind of really detaching self-worth from external validation. You know, who you are is not defined by who accepts or rejects you, because the people who know you most in your life tend to be the ones that accept you whatever state you're in.
Yeah.
You know, again, so your self-worth, to allow your self-worth to be dictated by the rejection from someone who doesn't even really know you and may never have even met you, you know, that's an enormous amount of power to be giving to the wrong person. You know, so just recognizing where you're attaching self-worth to kind of that external validation.
Can I just add something to that?
Please do.
And this is my own personal experience.
Yeah.
I've had periods in my life where pretty much all of my worth has been attached to finding and seeking out romantic partners. And when the times when I'd feel happiness would be like when I was smashing it with girls, like it would literally be that simple. And it took me a long time to figure out that, like, actually focusing on my connection with my true people, like my mum, my sisters, my closest friends, that's the thing that would give me that long lasting contentment. And actually from that moment, like once you start focusing on those important bits, the value you can bring to someone else is just immeasurable.
And how you turn up in relationships and in those earlier stages will be completely different because your worth isn't attached to it. Right? So there's less fear.
Right.
Because you know at the end of the day, the relationships, those core relationships, they are there for you. You know, so it's not like all your eggs in the one basket of someone who has an immense amount of power, because you'll probably be acting out in a way that isn't even authentic to you. Desperately trying to hold on to them because you cannot, because your worth, basically, you know that it will take a massive crash if they give you signals that it's not going. So you're on a roller coaster.
Exactly.
You know, you've sat on a roller coaster.
And you're putting...
Get off.
You're applying the power to them, but you're also like subtly applying pressure to that, which they're going to pick up on, right?
Huge pressure on a relationship if how well that goes basically dictates how you feel about yourself and your inherent like validity. So that will show up in ways that and will be coming out in ways that aren't necessarily conscious. But it will be there.
Okay. Anything else in terms of practical tips for people?
Yeah, I think, you know, regulating stress. So it is stressful dating. You know, you just don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know who's going to come into your, you know, into your inbox. You just, you know, so actually thinking, what can I do to kind of diffuse some of that stress, right? So that it's not all just kind of like focusing in on how well this is going. And it might be kind of like exercise to lower some of that cortisol. It might be, you know, just thinking, what are the things that kind of reduce my base level of stress? Like, what kind of things can I do maybe around work? What boundaries can I put in so that my base level of stress is in a better place? Because if we are already kind of like tightly wound up, then something not going so well, like that's going to flip you into that stress state pretty quickly. And you're more likely to be reactive. You're less likely to kind of be able to access that kind of cognitive part of your brain that's like, wait a minute, this isn't rejection of the entirety of who I am. You're more likely to kind of move to that primitive, like, I've been abandoned. How can I defend myself? Because it feels like an attack. You know, so I think just finding ways to regulate like your general stress is going to set you up better for navigating some of these challenges. And that focus on those social bonding, like that relationships, those kind of non-romantic relationships, that support network, those people that are going to be the ones that you turn to kind of process some of this stuff. That are going to be there for you. So that's really, you know, really important. And then just kind of practicing exposure. So in psychology, it's all about like, how can we just nudge, like if you feel like you've been really protective and you've been really defended and you're just kind of taking little risks, but they're kind of actually quite safe. You know, how can you kind of nudge the edge of your comfort zone a little bit? How can you maybe even put yourself in a position where, you know, low stakes, you might be rejected?
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, because actually the more that we do that, the more we show that primitive part of our brain, it's okay.
You know,
we just
nothing terrible is going to happen.
Yeah, we get used to it. And, you know, I guess you being on social media, there are probably messages that you might get now that a while ago would have set your stress response soaring, whereas now you can kind of see them for what they are. And it's because of that repeated exposure where you've felt threatened and actually you found that sense of safety again. You've kind of worked through it and you've worked it out and you've restored that sense of, you know what, I'm okay.
Oh God, I mean, I go proper passive aggressive with it now.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether, like, when I still get people now that have just watched the show and they're like, stingy 50-50 guy. And I'm like, look, whatever trauma happened to you as a child, like, I just know I see you and it's okay. And if the manifestation of that is you lashing out at strangers on social media, that's okay too.
Yeah.
And normally then they block me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but still, that's still quite a defensive.
Well, no, I know, absolutely.
You know what? I think it's getting to that place. It's getting to that place where you're like, bless you.
Yeah.
You know, okay. And actually, where you get to a point where you don't even have to kind of put loads of energy into it.
Exactly.
You think, I could put all my energy in to try and show that person, like, you know, what they're about, but actually, I'm going to keep that energy. And I'm going to put it into that relationship or that friendship.
But it's the important stuff.
Because really, it's feeling like you want to get that power back.
Well, this is it. It's one of the things I wanted to ask you.
It becomes this tussle.
Yeah.
Like, there's a little mini rejection in there.
Yeah.
And it's just like this grasping, like, how can I get my power back?
Exactly.
But actually, if you realise that they didn't have it in the first place, they've taken your power away. You've just been misunderstood.
Yeah.
And it's the more comfortable we can become with being misunderstood.
Yeah.
And just allowing people to misunderstand us and thinking, you know what? I get me.
Yeah.
Do you know what my mum gets me? Do you know what that mate gets me? And actually, that's what's important.
That's great, Anna. That's a really good way of looking at it. Because one of the things I was going to ask you about was like, so much of this, I feel like these feelings, these fears would just all be solved by better communication. That's what I always say. So if you are rejected by someone, having clarity on the reasons why, the real reasons, not the fact that they tightened up their backpack too tight, do you know what I mean? And that gave me the ick. Like the real reasons, you know, be more open and honest about this stuff. That would solve a lot of it. But you're not ever going to get that. You're not always going to get that. So, and I'm like, right, if you don't get it, my desire as a human being, and this is a weakness of mine, is like, I want to call them out. I want to show them that their interpretation of me was wrong and this is the real me.
Yeah.
And that's why I behave that way on social media. So,
yeah.
But it's like, I think it's a very, very natural thing as a human to want to justify your own behaviour and have your own back.
Yeah, but the bigger the playing field, which is, you know, what online dating is, it's really throwing out there, the more you're going to be misunderstood. So either you choose, and I honestly say, becoming more comfortable with being misunderstood has changed my entire life.
Yeah.
I have so much more headspace and energy when I'm not having to try and get so-and-so from whoever that I've never actually met to understand or, you know, to get me.
Yeah.
Actually, there will be some people that you date who will never get you. In fact, it might even be their prerogative not to get you because it's challenging too much of the narratives that they need to hold on to because they don't know another way to be. So it's easier to misunderstand you than it is to address that in themselves.
Yeah.
You know, so at the end of the day, it's nothing to do with you at all. So I think, the more comfortable we can become with being misunderstood, actually the more empowered we are and the more energized we are and the more capacity we have to put into those relationships and lower that bar of what the deal breakers are. Because if those icks are deal breakers in having a long-term relationship with someone, honestly, it's never going to happen.
You're sabotaging yourself.
Because you and whatever partner you find will ick the living daylights out of each other, right? Forevermore. I tell you. But that is life in all of its grittiness.
Yeah.
And it is, you wrestle with stuff and you argue about stuff and you know, you're up in the middle of the night sometimes with kids and it's just life throws curveballs and griefs and traumas and all of these things. And if an ick is enough, actually that sits with the icked.
Yeah.
Right? Do you really want this? Do you really want a real life walking alongside each other through the messy, dark times? If that person's backpack's too tight.
Yeah.
Like, we need to lower the bar.
Right, exactly. And become more resilient, I suppose, about this kind of stuff. So that's amazing. That was like such a good insight, the one you just gave. It was perfect.
Oh, good.
How are we doing on time?
Helpful.
Oh my God, that went real quick.
So I think it's 4:02.
Is there anything else you've got in your notes which you think is going to, like, good stuff you want to cover? Is it?
Oh, like, throughout.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
Okay.
That,
Good, I'm glad.
I was like looking at you as you were saying it, thinking that's going to be the best Instagram reel of my life.
It's funny when you start thinking it real.
Yeah, you do though. You do.
Start thinking in those little. Yeah, I mean,
But the only thing
it's just hard, to be honest. It's just hard because it is hard, and it's uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable, and that's actually, that is life and relationships. And I think, you know, relationships have been reduced to these online interactions that have to be exactly how you want them to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm moving on to the next person. You know what? There will be nothing that will meet that bar.
Well, this is, you know, this is just an opinion as opposed to fact. But I would imagine that 2 generations ago, right, like the way that my parents and my parents' parents met would have been, they exist in a small community with each other. They got introduced to someone through a mutual friend, and then they went on a date. And they weren't ever thinking, right, does this person hit every single requirement I meet or I need? They were just thinking, this person's nice, like, and then you sort of build something together, and you're not thinking about all the things that are wrong about that person. You're just thinking, they make me feel really good. Our values align. Like we're interested in the same stuff, and that's enough to create something.
Yeah. And they actually, you're seeing the heart of who people are more, aren't you? You're with them, and I think that's what happens. So much interaction happens online before you actually meet.
Yeah.
You know, when you sit in someone's presence and you are actually, and this is another kind of tip really, is to take the risks of just being authentic. I remember when I was dating, I actually tried to put people off.
Right.
Honestly,
Right.
I was at this place where I was so sick of these kind of like top level, like, really, I wasn't. So when I met this boy in a club, and I thought his name, so my husband's called Taryn, right? I thought he said his name was Karen. I was like, that's very strange, but cool. And, you know, I ended up trying to put him off and told him like stuff that had happened to me in recent years, like stuff that I'd been through, that I'd lost my sister, and that all of this was. And I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit him with the hard stuff. And if he does a runner, then he's, you know, I just thought I'm just going to be authentic from the off, so that I don't have to kind of slowly start revealing all this. Like, I'm not going to scare him off down the line.
Yeah.
So I was like, he's either going to run away scared, or he's not going to. And he didn't. And I think that's it, is that, you know, out of fear of rejection, what ends up happening is 2 people end up meeting, but versions of themselves that isn't actually even like who they are.
Yeah.
So then there's this slow stripping away of all these pretenses that actually become really exhausting to hold up. You probably have to like, right, I'm going to go on this date and I've got to remember to talk like this and not do that, and don't do that because someone said that was an ick. And like, you end up so stifled that what you're presenting isn't even an honest version of who you are. So even if you end up liking each other, you then have to start revealing who you actually are in a sustainable way. So I just think, you know, if you can, just make that little pledge to yourself that you're just going to rock up in wearing what you like rather than what your mates tell you should wear because you look scruffy, and just see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, because I think sometimes there's this kind of like tight feeling of like, I've got to be these things and say these things. I've got to get it right. And I've got to get the right line between humour and honesty. And like, it's just so stifling.
Well, it's the other thing I think why a lot of people experience this 2 or 3 month ick is because they're like, finally, now's the point where I have to reveal the real version of myself, not the polished first few dates version of myself. And that's scary for men in particular, I think.
Yeah.
Pushing through that's probably the most important thing you can do, because I can guarantee you, from my own experience, from your experience, from the sounds of it, getting past that initial phase and being more vulnerable, more authentic, it feels really good.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, you know, it's that feeling of safety to be able to do that with someone. I think that earlier on you can present a more honest version of yourself, and actually there is no kind of, there's less backpedaling. There's less like, oh my gosh, what if she sees the actual state of my flat? You know what? If you're just a bit chaotic and a bit of a mess, don't just spend 2 hours trying to tidy it up. You know, because sooner or later
they're going to find out.
Yeah. Just say, you know, I'm a bit of a mess.
Exactly. You're like, I haven't changed my sheets in 6 weeks. It's cool though. You know, they're crispy. It's fine.
Ew. Ick.
Nice one. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time. An amazing episode. Slide into my DMs if you have any burning men. Let me record that one.
Burning men.
Burning men. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Slide into my DMs if you have any burning why do men topics, questions, discussion points. I'm open to it. Don't forget to hit subscribe. It really, really helps. Tune in for next week's episode.